Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, and that time count post-closure.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak for 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to congratulate.
Would the Senate be in order? Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to congratulate my colleagues, Senator Hoeven and Senator Manchin, the co-sponsors of this legislation. I also want to commend the Energy Committee Chair, Senator Murkowski. This is important legislation. It's long overdue that we take this up, but it's encouraging that we finally are doing that. And so I commend them for that. Mr. President, the Senate's not in order.
Senate will be in order. Could the senators please take their conversations out of the chamber? Senate will be in order.
Thanks. Thank you.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of things about the Keystone Pipeline, and then I want to talk about an amendment that I'm going to be offering. First, I think one of the encouraging things about approving this pipeline is the benefits for the environment. The fact is we'll be moving oil on a pipeline, which is a cleaner, safer way to do it than any available alternative. That's good news. It's good news that it's going to create jobs across our country. The State Department has estimated 42,000 jobs in the development of this pipeline. That's terrific news for everyone who's going to get a chance to benefit from that work. Clearly, it's going to reduce our dependence on non-North American oil, which can only be a good thing from a geopolitical point of view as well as an economic point of view. And, of course, the fact is this legislation has bipartisan support. It has for a long time. You've got 31 Democrat votes in the House, 14 Democratic votes in the Senate, as well as every Republican senator the last time it was brought up, Mr. President. It's strongly supported by the labor community because they recognize the benefits of the jobs that it'll create, and I urge my colleagues to support this really important legislation. I also would take a moment to thank Leader McConnell for doing exactly what he said he would do and what many of us said we needed to do in this chamber, which is to reopen this body. Reopen it and have debates, put legislation on the floor, open it up for amendment, and let's have a discussion. Let's change policy in this country in ways that will be constructive. We are beginning that process now, as we said we would, and I think that's terrific. And I intend to take advantage of the opportunity. I have several amendments that I'm going to file and I intend to bring up with respect to this legislation. One is going to be an amendment that will encourage a transition of our federal government's vehicle fleet from the current practice of burning gasoline mostly. And I want to encourage the adoption of natural gas as an alternative fuel because natural gas is cleaner, it's domestic, it's actually cheaper. Without any government subsidy or taxpayer help, natural gas is a cheaper source of fuel. We have a staggering quantity. The United States is the world's #1 producer of natural gas. We've got 2.2 quadrillion cubic feet of gas. Now that's too big a number for me to wrap my brain around, but let's put it this way. That's the gas we know of, and it's enough to last the next 85 years based on any plausible projection of our use. It's a staggering amount. I have another amendment, Mr. President, and that will be an amendment that also has bipartisan support. I want to thank Senator Feinstein, Senators Flake, and Senators Manchin for supporting the effort to repeal the corn ethanol mandate in our fuel. This has been very bad policy we've had for far too long. It's time to end this, and that is the mandate that we grow corn and use it to burn in our gas tanks. It is a practice that is bad for the environment. It raises the cost of filling up our tanks. It raises the cost of food because so much of our corn production goes into this. And it's not good for our engines. There's no good reason to continue this, and I look forward to having the debate that will enable us to repeal the corn ethanol mandate. But the amendment I really want to talk about, Mr. President, is It's another bipartisan amendment. I want to thank Senator Casey for being the Democratic co-sponsor of this amendment, and I want to thank Senator Hatch for joining me in this. And this is an amendment that will preserve a really important, environmentally beneficial source of alternative energy that we have, especially in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and that we need to preserve, and it's under threat by two new rules that have been proposed by the EPA. Let me give you a little bit of background why we've gotten to this place. The fact is, in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, we've been mining coal for over a century, well over a century. And for many of the decades, especially in the early years of our coal development, we took the high energy density coal and we sold it. Our coal miners sold it to the steel industry, or it was used in the manufacturing process of making steel. And the low energy coal was left in piles, huge piles, actually mountains. And it's often referred to as waste coal. My first photo here is an illustration. This is a photograph of one of these waste coal piles. It's in Nannyglow in Cambria County, Pennsylvania. It's one of many piles, or as I say, mountains throughout Pennsylvania and West Virginia. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection estimates that there are 2 billion tons of waste coal like this, covering 180,000 acres in Pennsylvania alone. So think about that. It's a massive scale because of over a century of legacy of coal mining. And some of these piles are literally in people's backyards. Here you can see the people who live literally within a stone's, if you have a reasonably good arm, within a stone's throw, you can reach this pile. That's also Nannyglow in Cambria County. There are people who live, like I say, within a couple hundred feet. Now, what's the problem with these mountains? The problem with these mountains of coal is, I guarantee you, Mr. President, it rains on them. And when it rains, this is what happens. The runoff is horrendous. It looks like this. It looks like this in every one of these mountains of waste coal, everywhere that one exists, every time it rains. In 2003, in an op-ed entitled "The Benefits of Waste Coal," former Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell's Department of Environmental Protection secretary, whose name is Kathleen McGinty, she wrote, and I quote, "For years, these piles sat abandoned, generating iron, manganese, and aluminum pollution that discharged as runoff into Pennsylvania's waterways." That's exactly what happens when these piles just sit here. In 2011, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection report states, and I quote, "Coal refuse piles," the same, different name for the same thing, "that are not removed, i.e. burned for fuel, generally create severe acid mine damage with pH in the 2.5 range. A pH that high, by the way, is somewhere between the intensity of stomach acid and hydrochloric acid. That kind of acidic chemical running into our waters is enormously damaging." Slide number 4 is another depiction of exactly what happens when rainwater runs through these piles and finds its way into the streams and rivers and ponds and lakes of Pennsylvania. It pollutes hundreds of miles of rivers and streams. In 2007, former Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell, said, and I quote, "These piles are domestic energy sources that have significant value when put into production in CFB cogeneration plants. When left on the ground, waste coal presents a grave environmental threat. Runoff from these piles contributes to the abandoned mine drainage that is the second leading water pollution problem in the Commonwealth, literally killing all life in some 2,000 stream miles in Pennsylvania." But that's not all. Photo number 5 shows something else that happens with these piles. They catch fire. They spontaneously combust. It could be that it's lightning, it could be carelessness, whatever their cause, sometimes it's unknown, but they catch fire. This particular photo is from Fell Township in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania. Pile caught fire in December of 2013. It burned for over a year. it is very hard to put these fires out. And it burned out of control with obviously no ability to do anything about the pollutants that are being released by the combustion because it's completely uncontrolled. We think that the fire went out in January, but authorities are still not certain that it may not be smoldering somewhere below the surface. This, by the way, this mountain is 600 feet from residential housing. What is the effect of this kind of combustion on the residents in that area? So how much of this burns? Maybe people would think this is just a freak incident. Not really. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection estimates that 6.6 million tons of waste coal burns each year. Unintended, uncontrolled, but it's burning. And in the process, it emits 9 million tons of carbon dioxide and many tons of other uncontrolled air pollution. So what about cleaning all this up? The cost would be absolutely staggering. Again, former Department of Environmental Protection Secretary McGinty estimated that it costs between $20,000 and $40,000 to reclaim just 1 acre of waste coal. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of waste coal, and the Pennsylvania General Assembly has estimated it would cost approximately $15 billion to remediate just Pennsylvanians' abandoned mine sites. So that's the bad news, Mr. President. The good news is the market has figured out a solution for this. A free market has developed a way to systematically eliminate these mountains of waste coal. And what we've done for decades now is we've had power plants designed specifically for the purpose of burning this coal, and doing so in a controlled fashion, in a regulated fashion. And what they've been doing is they've removed 210 million tons of waste coal producing electricity. They've remediated over 8,000 acres. They've generated 1.8 thousand gigawatts of electricity. That's enough to power 1.3 million homes. And in the process, the generation of electricity from this waste coal has resulted directly in 1,200 jobs. Now, in the past, the EPA has always acknowledged the benefits of systematically eliminating these mountains of waste coal and doing so by generating electricity. In fact, I'll quote a report from the EPA in 2011 that says, quote, "Because of the unique environmental benefits that coal refuse-fired EGUs provide, these units warrant special consideration." The problem that I'm here to address, Mr. President, is that there are 2 new rules passed by the EPA that would bring an end to the systematic elimination of these mountains, because these rules are prohibitive. It's not possible for the waste coal power plants to comply with these rules. So they would all be shut down, and we would be left with these piles indefinitely, marring our landscape, polluting our water, and polluting our air. The 2 specific rules that would do this, the cross-state air pollution rule is very likely to have the effect of imposing absolutely unattainable goals on waste coal power plants. And the Utility MAC rule establishes new, very stringent emission controls, a whole new generation of very stringent regulations that this industry cannot meet. So if these rules go into effect, Mr. President, which they're scheduled to go into effect later this year, then waste coal electric generation ends. These plants close, and as a result, we lose the electric power that they've been generating. We lose the 1,200 jobs that they sustain. We lose the low-cost electricity that's reliable and domestic. We have a more serious air pollution problem when these spontaneous combustions continue. And we have a huge problem with the ongoing water pollution as our nearby streams and the water table will be polluted. So that's why Senator Casey and I and Senator Hatch have joined to offer an amendment to this legislation that would exempt the waste coal power plants from just the most onerous, the prohibitive aspects of these new rules. With respect to utility MACT, we would retain all the regulatory limits on mercury and chromium and nickel and other heavy metals, but it would exempt the waste coal plants from the cross-state air pollution rules, and it would allow these plants to continue remediating these waste coal sites. I want to stress, it's important to point out that all of the existing regulations that have long been in effect would remain in effect. What we're talking about is these two new rules that would be guaranteed to shut down the industry. Those two rules would not go into effect with respect to the waste coal electric generation. The fact is, if our amendment is adopted and becomes law, then we're going to be helping our environment by continuing to systematically eliminate these blights. I want more success stories like the one in this photograph. This photo was taken in Nesquehoning in Carbon County, Pennsylvania. The first photo shows what the ground looked like when the waste coal was piled up. The second photo shows what happens after it's been consumed and the land has been restored. This happened precisely because there is a nearby waste coal power plant that was able to take this coal, generate electricity for us to use, and restore the land to a much, much safer, much more environmentally friendly, and much more attractive environment. We need to keep these plants operating. It is about improving our environment. It's about keeping people working. It's about the low-cost, reliable electricity that we have from it. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.